Hi, you're listening to Unbuckle Your Fears. I'm Megan Barrow. I'm a lived experience speaker and advisor sharing my story and experiences of agoraphobia, anxiety, panic and phobic disorders, depression, suicide, and complex trauma. In this episode, I'll be sharing my thoughts on why having panic attacks and anxiety is not failure. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners of the land I'm coming from today in Melbourne, Australia. Also, please support my advocacy and podcast by subscribing on your favourite platform and giving me a rating. And you can follow me on Instagram at Unbuckle Your Fears, but I'm also on LinkedIn if that's your jam. And if you want to check out some of my journey and the theory I used in my agoraphobia recovery, head to the website unbuckleyourfears.com. So let's get stuck into this topic. And it's a bit of a passion one for me because often I see with influencers, especially on social media, the focus on anxiety recovery being about not having anxiety and not having panic attacks. And I also see posts and I receive messages from people who talk about that they're not doing well or they failed an exposure or an event or an experience because they had a panic attack. I would love to flip this narrative to having panic attacks and having anxiety is not only not failure, but occasionally it may actually be an achievement. So let's start with the very first session I went to my psychiatrist. So I go into detail on previous episodes about that, especially my recovery journey, part one. I think that's episode 3. One of the big takeaways I remember when he set up the goals for what we would work through and where I would end up with his sessions was that I would get my independence back. He very much said, You're going to go back to work, you're going to get your life back. That's what we're working towards. And it was actually framed very positively as I think about it. There was no doubt, which I probably needed very much. I didn't know. As I mentioned in that podcast, I thought it was unattainable. He was right. I did get it back, and it is achievable. But one of the things that he told me was, I cannot guarantee that you won't have another panic attack. That's not what recovery is. That is not what this treatment is. That is not what our goal is. And he talked about one of his past clients coming back to him really angry one day. And he said he really confronted me and said, I had a panic attack. You said I would never have another panic attack. And he said how he responded, saying, No, I never guaranteed that. That's not the point of all the work we do. The point is that you're going to occasionally have a panic attack and you're going to get through it. And real recovery, and I hate the word recovery, so let's say well-being, and please, I've mentioned it before in previous episodes as well, to define your own recovery. And I will do another separate episode on that because that's another thing I'm really passionate about. Um, but the point is that I think my greatest moments and when I really realized I was recovered, and I'm doing that in air quotation marks, was when I'd had a panic attack. And not only did I just keep going, I didn't retreat in any way. I literally kept going. So I kept doing difficult things. And I got up the next day and didn't fear it. I was like, okay, that was a bad moment. I had it. Sometimes I can sort of work out why I might have had it. Other times I have no idea. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But I got through it. That's fine. Let's move on. I guess for me, it gets to a point where I just don't want to go backwards either. So even when How about this? Do you sometimes, I know for me, in the middle of the night, I'll sort of start second guessing myself. And sometimes I'll be, oh my goodness, I have to go into the city and I can't imagine ever. How on earth do I go in the city? That's just really scary. How do I do that? How do I do that? I can't do that. And in my mind, I'm convinced that I'm going to just never leave the house again. And then I get up in the morning and I go into the city and I'm fine. So don't listen to that nighttime brain, I tell you. So I think the other interesting reflection going back to my psychiatrist was that he never ever focused on when I said I'd had a panic attack or when I was feeling really anxious or I was panicky or my anxiety panic attack was 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. He would just never focus on that. And he certainly never said or framed it as being negative. And it's interesting for me to reflect how lucky I feel I found him as my psychiatrist and how different my journey would have been if I was looking at some of the theory and pragmatism about anxiety, agoraphobia, panic attacks on social media from experts. I just think they would have set me up for failure. I totally get and respect that a lot of people really benefit from a lot of the theory out there on social media. For me, it interferes with how I feel about my success today. And I am out there as a public speaker sharing my lived experience. Like people come to me and say, oh my goodness, how amazing are you? And look at what you achieve. I have people come to me and say, I was a bit nervous to come here, or my anxiety's been a bit up, and I think of you and you inspire me to just get through it. That if Megan's doing it, I can do it. So the fact that the theory messes with my mindset, I am so glad I'm in a place of wellness and I can critically look at what they're saying and refute it. Because just because someone says it, just because there's theory out there, doesn't mean that it's actually current. It doesn't mean that it's evidence based. It doesn't mean that it's helpful, that it's designed for everyone. A lot of it, to me, is outdated, gender biased theory that really needs some updating. So the fact that my psychiatrist never ever framed having a panic attack during an exposure therapy as anything negative is something really important, I think, not just for me, but for you, that's not the point. The point is that we're pushing ourselves through it. So he had a real motto of any exposure therapy that I had to reward. Every time that he set me up for a task, whether it was homework or something within the session or just after the session, he would say, so how are you going to acknowledge what you've done? Now, that wasn't a caveat of only reward yourself if you felt this way. It was if you achieve it, how are you going to acknowledge and reward? And that's the point. He was making my brain think that getting through it, regardless of how I felt, was the point. And that was the win. That was the objective. That is the objective. So I think the other aspect is when we're in recovery and working towards recovery, again, quotation marks, I'm doing my air quotation marks because I hate that word recovery. We're going to have panic attacks and feel panicky. And if you're doing something new, if you've got panic disorder, if you've been diagnosed with panic disorder or phobic disorder, you're likely to be panicky. Now, we do our best. Like, obviously, a lot of the theory, the cognitive behavior therapy, the CBT, is about containing the panic, to sit there or stand there, but to keep going. So he used awake, which is, now I'm going to muck this up because I don't have it written down, which is very poor producing for my part, but let me get this right. It's accept the feelings, the anxiety feelings. It's watch the feelings rise and fall. It's anticipate you will feel better. It is keep going. And E is to expect to get better. I think they were it. Some of them sound a bit similar, so maybe I've mucked it up. But you get the idea that the biggest thing for me is I think of the bell chart that he showed me, and that it's going to rise and then it's going to fall, because it has to fall at some point. So absolutely. Part of recovery is to be able to sit with the panicky feelings and not run away. And, even I, to this day, can feel sometimes beaten up when I don't get through a panic attack, which happened quite recently. But I actually do think that I think a lot of these social media accounts actually muck up my thinking, because I don't know that I always used to think that way. I would actually think, oh, but I stayed. I might have got out of my seat the other week, which I did. But I stood up the back and I didn't leave the person that I was with, who was someone that is a client. It's not a good friend. And they were fine, just sort of letting me get out of my seat. They didn't have to move. They were fine. But I stayed. I didn't run home. And then I got on a tram and, so isn't that an achievement rather than a failure? Let's look at how we're looking at that. So I'm going to challenge you to, rather than think of having anxiety, having panic, having phobic responses as a celebration. Is that kind of weird to think that way? But I think if you're out there trying and you're out there living when we've had agoraphobia, or we have debilitating anxiety, or we have panic disorder, or we have trauma responses, or whatever it is, let's add all the mental ill health. Let's add all health. If you're out there just having a go, isn't that incredible? And in fact, let's look at the analogy about people with a physical ailment and how much they're celebrated. It doesn't matter that they've had to use devices or aids or safety tools or support tools. They're celebrated for getting through. So why don't we celebrate us getting through? And how even more incredible if we've got through with panic. And I think what I've learned, and I talked about in I think it was part 2 of the agoraphobia recovery, is the more that you get out there, that you just learn that you're okay. And now for me, when I have a panic attack, it's so infrequent that I know 99% of the time I go out, I'm fine. That 1% or whatever it is, it might be more or less depending on what's going on in my life. Because that's the other thing. We can't control life. So we're going to have stresses in our life that we can't control. So how we respond shouldn't be something that is seen as a negative. We all respond in different ways. And I tell you, my nervous system is beat up. But I also realize that I have trauma, which also adds to different responses. I have trauma responses. I don't know if that's something you can relate to. But regardless, this notion that you can regulate your nervous system is just rubbish. That's my lived experience. And if someone wants to argue with me about that, well, go for it. And if their lived experience matches theory that says you can learn to regulate and breathe through and accept and all that sort of stuff, that's amazing. I think that's fantastic. That's not my lived experience. And I want to set people up for success, not failure. Having a panic attack is not failure. It also doesn't necessarily mean you're going backwards. Sometimes I've had panic attacks when I'm actually pushing myself so outside my comfort zone that it's actually a positive. It just means that I've taken the next step. So I hope this little chat has been helpful. I've tried to keep it a bit more concise. So overall, in summary, set yourself up for success in whatever you define as recovery, in your anxiety, panic disorder, agoraphobia, phobic disorder, OCD journey. That often it will be for many of us that we will always have a baseline of crappy, yucky feelings. But the wellness and the recovery is on the side of that you push through. And that sometimes when you have those really bad periods of anxiety or have a panic attack or whatever it might be, that's not a negative. And it's an absolute achievement to get through. That's what I try and focus on. Gee, I had a panic attack, but gee, how amazing. I didn't run away and I kept going. Or gee, that took such guts to stick on the tram because I was really panicking at one point. Or to stick in a meeting. I've had panic attacks in client meetings. I've had a panic attack on stage in front of 80 people doing a presentation of my lived experience. Now, what an achievement to have got through and that I kept going. That's a real achievement as I really think about it. My goodness. So, for anyone who wants to say that meant I was going backwards, no, I would say it just proved how far I've come. So, I hope this reframe has helped you. If you'd like to reach out and share your thoughts, I'd love to hear from you. You can email admin@unbuckleyourfears.com or find me on Instagram, Unbuckle Your Fears. There is also a Facebook page, or you can find me, Megan Barrow, on LinkedIn, although there are a few Megan Barrows, so maybe I'll put my link in the description there. But as always, I want to leave you with a question. So I actually want to follow up, and I'm actually thinking I'll do it for myself. I'll be in the city tomorrow for a client meeting, and I'm actually catching up with someone else, which I'm a little bit nervous about for various reasons. I won't go into it. So, but yeah, I'll be heading into the city in Melbourne. So I might do the very same thing, but I want you to think about how you will reward yourself when you get through a panic attack. Now, that could be as simple as giving yourself a gold star. It might be that you'll have a nice hot bath. It might be that you watch some crappy TV. It might be that you go and buy yourself something. Gee, that's a bit easier these days. In my days, I had to physically go out and buy something. Today, you can treat yourself online. But just think, I really want you to reframe it. If you feel like, oh, Megan, this is not helpful because I have agoraphobia and getting through the panic attacks is not achievement, I would actually challenge that thinking too. That actually really is. It really is to just get through that day. I know that how difficult those 3 years and other periods have been where I've been very almost agoraphobic, housebound. It's a huge achievement. And I think every now and then you need to acknowledge that. It may mean that it's not the life you want at the moment, but that's okay. Go back to my other episodes where I talked about recovery and the journey I had. Anyway, please try and reframe the old panic attack and please reward yourself and acknowledge how incredible it is to get through it. And it is one of those invisible illnesses and disorders that it's hard to celebrate us. If it was physical, people would be like giving us, we'd be all over the telly. There'd be lots of before and after pictures everywhere, but we don't really have that. It's sort of our word. But hey, I've been through it. I get it. So your word means everything to me. So you go and reward yourself. With that, have a good week. I'm trying to do these each week. So please take care of yourself and we'll catch up next time.